There comes a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when the soul senses what the eyes have not yet seen, a shift in the air, a heaviness in conversation, a subtle withdrawal of warmth. This is not imagination, it is intuition speaking, whispering of a truth buried beneath masks and manners. In every human relationship, there exists not just the outer dance of words and gestures, but an inner world of psychic energies. When someone close to you harbors contempt, it does not always arrive in rage or accusation. It slips in silently, like a shadow across the heart. The unconscious speaks through irony, sarcasm, and neglect. These are the tongues of the unseen. There is a quiet tension that lives beneath the surface of many relationships, a subtle energy that cannot be seen but can certainly be felt. When someone close to you secretly harbors resentment or hate, they may never voice it, but the psyche always speaks through signs. This is not about paranoia or suspicion. It is about understanding the deeper layers of the human mind, particularly the concept of shadow projection. Each individual carries within them parts of the self that are unconscious, often made up of traits they deem unacceptable or undesirable. These traits do not vanish, instead, they sink into what is known as the shadow. It is in this psychological basement that we store aspects of ourselves we do not wish to face: jealousy, rage, insecurity, weakness, or cruelty. However, the psyche has a remarkable mechanism for maintaining balance. When the individual cannot integrate these traits consciously, they often project them onto others. This is the heart of shadow projection, the act of attributing one's own denied feelings, motivations, or qualities to someone else. A person who secretly feels envious may accuse others of being competitive or arrogant. One who feels weak may grow angry at another's confidence, interpreting it as bullying. These projections can be subtle or overt, but they always distort reality, replacing true perception with an emotional illusion. In the context of relationships, shadow projection becomes particularly important. Someone close to you, whether a friend, a family member, or a partner, may begin to treat you coldly or criticize you in ways that seem disconnected from your actions. Their language may shift, once supportive, now laced with sarcasm, once loving, now tinged with passive judgment. These behaviors are not random. They are often the product of the other person's unresolved inner conflict being externalized onto you. What is deeply significant and often overlooked is that the person engaging in this projection is usually unconscious of it. They do not realize they are reacting to a part of themselves they see in you. To them, the feelings of irritation, resentment, or even hatred appear entirely justified. In their view, you are the one who has changed, who has become difficult, arrogant, insensitive, or cold. But the reality is that you may have done nothing except mirror back to them a quality they have long denied in themselves. This mechanism serves a psychological purpose. It allows the person to maintain a positive self-image. Rather than admit to feeling envious, insecure, or inadequate, they place those feelings outside of themselves, on you. You become the screen upon which their inner drama is projected. In this way, their hatred is not truly about you. It is about their inability to reconcile with their own shadow. There are ways to identify when you are the target of such projection. One sign is emotional disproportion. If someone close to you reacts to minor situations with excessive anger, contempt, or judgment, they may be projecting. Their response is not aligned with the reality of the situation. It is charged with the energy of something deeper and older. Another sign is contradiction. They may accuse you of behaviors you find completely foreign or inconsistent with your personality. It feels like they are seeing someone else in your place, and in many ways they are. Furthermore, projection often causes the relationship dynamic to shift subtly over time. the connection becomes strained with less emotional openness and more guardedness. Conversations lose their ease. There may be a growing sense of being misunderstood, not on the surface, but in a way that touches your core identity. The person sees you through a distorted lens, and no amount of explaining seems to clear it up. This is the power of projection. It replaces perception with a myth, and the myth is built from their own psychological material. So what is to be done? The first step is awareness. Understand that when you sense this kind of silent resentment or hostility from someone close, it does not mean you are at fault. It may simply mean that you are standing in the place of their shadow. They are not relating to you. They are reacting to a part of themselves that they cannot yet accept. The second step is maintaining your own center. Do not become entangled in their emotional confusion. Do not try to fix what you did not break. The more you try to explain yourself, the more they may resist, because what they are avoiding is not your behavior but their own reflection, and yet this process need not be a source of bitterness. On the contrary, it can be an invitation to deepen your psychological insight. When you realize that hatred from someone close may stem from their shadow, you are no longer just a victim of the dynamic. You are an observer, a student of the psyche. You gain clarity, and with clarity comes strength. In some cases, this insight can create space for compassion. It does not excuse the behavior, but it contextualizes it. When you understand that another's negativity toward you may be rooted in self-conflict, you begin to see the pain beneath their actions. That pain, like yours, is human, and it is only through such understanding of yourself and others that growth becomes possible. Ultimately, every difficult relationship can serve as a mirror. Even if someone's resentment is unfairly directed at you, the experience can teach you about your own boundaries, your emotional responses, and the ways in which you, too, might be projecting or absorbing the projections of others. Self-knowledge is not born only in moments of harmony. It is forged in the fires of discomfort and tension. The more you understand the concept of the shadow and its projection, the less power unconscious hatred will have over your life. You begin to see behind the mask. You begin to recognize the invisible scripts being acted out in silence. And in doing so, you step out of the role of victim, not by confrontation, but by elevation. You rise above the projection and reclaim your truth. There are moments in relationships when hostility does not come as a storm, but as a drizzle, constant, quiet, almost deniable. You may find yourself questioning if something is wrong, even though everything appears normal on the surface. This is the terrain of passive aggression, a deeply embedded psychological defense that masks inner hostility with outer politeness. It is not a direct confrontation, but rather a subtle battlefield where emotions are suppressed, twisted, and disguised. Understanding passive aggression requires a deeper view of the psyche, one that goes beyond behavior into the motivations hidden beneath the surface of consciousness. Passive aggression arises when an individual feels hostility, resentment, or envy, but cannot or will not express it openly. This refusal may stem from fear of conflict, a desire to maintain a moral or social image, or an internal repression of anger as something unacceptable. But unexpressed emotion does not disappear, it finds expression in disguised forms. The result is behavior that appears agreeable on the outside but communicates rejection, resistance, or dislike in coded and indirect ways. In relationships, this often emerges through small but repeated actions. A partner forgets to do something important to you, a friend gives a compliment that cuts rather than lifts, or a colleague constantly delays cooperation while insisting they're just busy. These actions individually may seem harmless, but their pattern carries a psychological message. The behavior says, "I am not angry," but the emotional tone says otherwise. The person may deny any ill will, but their subtle withdrawal, their sarcasm, their carefully chosen absences speak louder than words. What makes passive aggression particularly complex is its ambiguity. It allows the aggressor to avoid responsibility while still expressing hostility. Because the message is hidden, it often leaves the recipient in a state of confusion or self-doubt. You begin to question your perceptions. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. This is part of the mechanism's power. It destabilizes the other person's sense of clarity and confidence. It places you in a fog, making it harder to respond or even identify the issue clearly. But passive aggression is not simply manipulation. It is, at its core, a form of psychological masking. The individual who uses it is often unable to confront their own discomfort, fear, or anger directly. They may have learned from early life that open conflict leads to rejection or punishment, or they may have internalized the belief that expressing anger is morally wrong or socially unacceptable, so instead they bury their aggression. They put on a mask of politeness, helpfulness, or detachment while the suppressed emotion leaks through the cracks. This creates an internal split within the person, a psychological disharmony. The conscious mind holds the image of being good, cooperative, or calm, while the unconscious holds the anger, frustration, or contempt. Because the psyche cannot tolerate this division forever, the unconscious emotion pushes for expression. And since it cannot come out directly, it disguises itself, sneaking into interactions like a ghost in the room. From a psychological perspective, this dynamic reflects a defense mechanism that protects the ego from feeling or being perceived as bad or aggressive. But in doing so, it denies the authentic self the right to full expression. Anger, when acknowledged and expressed healthily, can serve a purpose. It can defend boundaries, signal injustice, or restore balance. When repressed, it distorts both the self and relationships. The person becomes trapped in a cycle of indirect hostility, unable to express what they feel, and often unaware that their actions are being driven by suppressed emotion. For those on the receiving end, dealing with passive aggression can be deeply unsettling. It is difficult to respond to what is not openly declared. If you call it out, you may be met with denial or gaslighting. "You're imagining things. I didn't mean anything by it," or "You're too sensitive." This creates a psychological bind. If you ignore the behavior, it continues. If you confront it, you're blamed for being unreasonable. This emotional ambiguity is not accidental. It is how passive aggression maintains control while avoiding accountability. The key to navigating this terrain is not to react in kind, but to remain anchored in emotional awareness. Recognize that what you are experiencing may not be about the surface behavior, but the feeling beneath it. Train yourself to see the pattern, not just the isolated action. When someone always accidentally overlooks your needs, forgets your efforts, or offers support that feels hollow, consider what they may be holding inside. Are they silently competing with you? Do they envy your confidence, your success, or your joy? Have they felt hurt or dismissed but been unable to express it? This is not to excuse the behavior, but to understand it. Understanding passive aggression as a mask helps you stay grounded. It keeps you from internalizing the blame or distorting your self-worth. It also gives you the option to respond from a place of clarity, not confusion. Sometimes naming the pattern gently, without accusation, can open space for more honest communication. Other times, the pattern is so deeply entrenched in the other person's psyche that change is unlikely without their own self-reflection. In truth, passive aggression is a call for consciousness. It reflects a psychological immaturity, an inability to handle conflict with transparency and courage, but it also points to a deeper human truth, that the parts of ourselves we repress do not disappear, they return in disguised form. The more a person denies their anger, the more it will shape their behavior from behind the mask. By becoming aware of this dynamic, you liberate yourself from its confusion. You no longer need to explain away the cold tone in warm words, the small betrayals behind friendly gestures, or the subtle sabotage behind promises. You see the mask for what it is, a defense against vulnerability. And in that awareness, you reclaim your clarity, your voice, and your peace. In every interaction between two human beings, there is more than just a conversation or an exchange of gestures. There is something invisible yet deeply felt, a psychological and emotional energy that flows between people, shaping how they feel in each other's presence. This energy exchange, though intangible, is one of the most profound and telling aspects of human connection. It is through this subtle transmission that we often sense when someone close to us harbors hidden resentment or dislike, even when their words and actions suggest otherwise. The body might not speak, but the psyche does, and the energy it carries is impossible to conceal entirely. When someone secretly harbors negative emotions toward you, be it envy, contempt, or hatred, that energy does not remain isolated within them. It leaks into the space between you, coloring the emotional atmosphere. You may notice it in the way their presence feels increasingly heavy or distant. Perhaps you feel emotionally drained after spending time with them, even if they have not done or said anything overtly unkind. The energy between you feels out of balance, as if something beneath the surface is off kilter. This sense is not a matter of imagination. It is an intuitive awareness of the emotional currents running beneath the surface of your relationship. Energy, in the psychological sense, is not mystical. It is a reflection of intention, emotion, attention, and unconscious projection. When two people connect, they share not only their thoughts and expressions, but also their emotional states. A person filled with joy, curiosity, and affection transmits a kind of openness that is palpable. Conversely, a person filled with suppressed resentment or masked animosity creates an atmosphere of tension, one that feels heavy, confusing, or subtly threatening. The human nervous system is attuned to these nuances. Long before we consciously realize it, we have often already sensed whether a person is safe, distant, resentful, or kind. One of the clearest signs of an imbalanced energy exchange is emotional exhaustion. After being with someone who secretly harbors negative feelings toward you, you may find yourself inexplicably tired, irritable, or emotionally confused. This happens because your psyche has been working in overdrive, unconsciously processing the tension and contradiction between their outward behavior and their inner emotional state. The mind attempts to reconcile what it sees, Miles' polite conversation, with what it feels, a kind of emotional hostility or withdrawal. This effort drains your psychological energy as you are caught in an invisible tug-of war between truth and appearance. This dynamic is especially complicated when the other person is close to you, when they are a friend, family member, or partner. In such cases, the energetic impact is more significant because the emotional bond is stronger. The deeper the bond, the more sensitive we become to the emotional frequency of the other person. We feel it more acutely when they shift away from us, when their warmth turns cool, or when their support becomes ambivalent. These are not minor changes, they alter the quality of the relationship at a fundamental level. The difficulty arises because most people are not consciously aware of the energy they emit. If someone close to you secretly resents or dislikes you, they may not fully admit it to themselves. They might believe they are treating you well because they continue to be polite or maintain appearances, but the unconscious cannot lie. The emotional truth seeps into their tone of voice, their body language, their timing, and their emotional availability. Over time, the energy becomes inconsistent. One moment warm, the next moment cold. One moment supportive, the next subtly dismissive. You are left trying to navigate a landscape where nothing can be trusted entirely. For the person on the receiving end, this kind of energy exchange can lead to self-doubt. You may begin to wonder if you are imagining the disconnect, or if you are being too sensitive. But the psyche has its own wisdom, and the discomfort you feel is often your mind's way of alerting you to emotional dishonesty. You are sensing a misalignment, a split between what is being presented and what is truly felt. The energy exchange has become contaminated, and your intuition is trying to bring this to your awareness. Rather than dismissing these sensations, it is important to trust them. Energy does not need verbal confirmation to be valid. In fact, the body often registers truth faster than the mind does. A tightness in your chest, a feeling of walking on eggshells, or a sense of relief when the person leaves, all of these are signals. They are the psyche's response to an unbalanced emotional environment. By paying attention to these signals, you begin to reclaim your own emotional clarity. You stop second, guessing your experience and start observing it with greater awareness. Energy exchange is not a one-way phenomenon. It is reciprocal. When you sense that someone close to you is emotionally pulling away or hiding animosity, your own energy begins to shift in response. You may unconsciously protect yourself by withdrawing, becoming more guarded, or suppressing your own feelings. This, too, changes the dynamic, often creating a feedback loop of further distance and discomfort. Without honest recognition, the relationship begins to erode, not because of what is said, but because of what is left unspoken and unfelt. Energy, unlike words, demands authenticity. It cannot be faked for long. The challenge lies in addressing this imbalance without creating unnecessary conflict. It requires a deep level of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Sometimes the best response is simply to acknowledge the shift within yourself, to recognize that something has changed, and to become more discerning in how much emotional energy you continue to invest. In other cases, it may be appropriate to gently inquire, to give space for honesty, or to set new boundaries. What matters most is that you do not ignore your own internal signals. The energy you feel is a message. It carries information not just about the other person, but about your own psychological needs and your evolving capacity for emotional truth. In the end, every relationship is shaped by the energy that flows between the individuals involved. When that energy is authentic, balanced, and open, it becomes a source of strength and connection. When it is blocked, distorted, or secretly hostile, it becomes a source of confusion, fatigue, and emotional dissonance. By becoming more attuned to the energy exchange in your relationships, you begin to see what words alone cannot reveal. You move beyond appearances into the deeper realm of psychological truth. And in doing so, you come closer to living in integrity with yourself and with those around you. Human beings rarely speak the full truth of what they feel. Emotions, especially those that are painful or socially unacceptable, often find other channels for expression. Instead of direct confrontation, anger becomes silence. Instead of clear rejection, smiles hide discomfort. Beneath even the most ordinary of actions lies meaning that is not always conscious, but is certainly significant. This is the realm of symbolic behavior, where every gesture, word, or choice holds deeper psychological content. And when someone close to you secretly harbors hatred or resentment, it often emerges not through what they say, but through what their actions symbolically communicate. To understand this level of interaction is to look beneath the surface and read the language of the psyche rather than the words of the mouth. Symbolism in behavior occurs when an individual, unable or unwilling to confront their emotions directly, unconsciously chooses actions that express those emotions through metaphor or representation. This does not require conscious intention. In fact, it is often when the person is most unaware that their behaviors become most symbolically charged. A forgotten birthday may represent more than forgetfulness. It may symbolize emotional distancing. A joke made at your expense may carry more weight than humor. It may be an expression of hidden aggression masked as playfulness. A consistent pattern of lateness or unreliability may not be a matter of poor time management, but a symbolic rejection of your importance. These behaviors, small on the surface, speak volumes in the language of the unconscious. The psyche is not linear. It does not operate in pure logic or spoken language. It speaks in symbols, patterns, and emotional tones. Just as dreams use symbolic imagery to express inner realities, so too do waking behaviors often serve as a dream in action. For instance, if someone consistently downplays your accomplishments or shifts the topic when you share good news, it may symbolize their inner struggle with envy or inadequacy. They may not consciously hate you, but a part of them, perhaps a wounded or threatened aspect, does. And that part, though unseen, finds a way to act. Behavior becomes the medium through which the unconscious speaks. This is not to suggest that every misstep or inconsistency is a sign of hidden hatred. People are imperfect. They forget, they misspeak, they falter. But symbolic behavior is marked by pattern and emotional tone. It repeats, often in emotionally charged situations. It carries a feeling of being about more than the surface issue. It causes confusion, unease, or emotional friction that is disproportionate to what is being said or done. When you sense this kind of dissonance in someone close to you, it is worth asking, what might this behavior be symbolizing? What emotion, if expressed directly, would make sense of this pattern? Another example is withdrawal or withholding. A person who once was emotionally open may become distant, less expressive, less present. They may not accuse you, argue with you, or insult you, but their detachment speaks louder than any of those. It may symbolize resentment. It may represent their attempt to punish you without appearing cruel. Or it may reflect their internal struggle, torn between loyalty and bitterness. Their silence becomes the symbol of what they cannot say. Their absence becomes a statement of presence, that is, the presence of emotional conflict. Symbolism in behavior also plays out in the roles people adopt. Someone who secretly feels competitive with you may adopt the role of the helper or the humble friend, always serving but subtly undermining. Their overgiving may symbolize a desire to prove superiority, to maintain control, or to elicit dependence. At face value, their behavior seems generous, but symbolically it may be masking rivalry or resentment. The archetype they play is not always what it seems. The key is to notice not only what they do but how their actions make you feel. If you consistently feel small, indebted, or subtly manipulated, there may be symbolic content at work. This symbolic dimension of behavior is deeply rooted in the unconscious. It arises from complexes, clusters of emotionally charged ideas and experiences that shape our perceptions and reactions. A person with an unresolved complex around rejection, for example, may interpret your success as a threat and unconsciously act to diminish it. They may not feel hatred in the ordinary sense, but the complex within them harbors it. And so their behavior takes on a symbolic function to assert, protect, or avenge the wounded part of themselves, often at your expense. Understanding this does not require judgment, only awareness. When you begin to see the symbolic meaning behind someone's behavior, you stop taking it purely at face value. You begin to decode the hidden messages. You see that the sarcasm may be a symbol of suppressed rage. The indifference may symbolize deep hurt. The need to control may represent an inner fear of inadequacy, and this decoding gives you psychological clarity. You no longer react blindly, you observe, you learn, and you decide how to engage from a place of strength rather than confusion. What is essential to understand is that symbolism in behavior is not just a reflection of the other person. It is also a mirror for you. Your reactions, your emotional triggers, your patterns of tolerance or avoidance all contain symbolic meaning. If you repeatedly find yourself drawn to people who subtly undermine you, what might that pattern symbolize within your own psyche? What unresolved story are you reenacting? What emotional wound is seeking expression through these dynamics? The symbolic layer of human behavior is often the most honest. People may lie with their words, even to themselves, but their actions rarely deceive entirely. They act out what they cannot admit. They perform what they cannot articulate. In this way, behavior becomes a script written by the unconscious and staged in everyday life. The more attuned you become to this symbolic language, the more deeply you understand not just others, but also yourself. You begin to live with greater psychological precision, responding not only to what is said, but to what is truly meant, to what the soul is trying to express through the body and through behavior. There is a powerful moment between perception and response, a quiet psychological pause in which we decide not only how we will act, but who we are. In that moment lies the chance to reflect before we accuse, to turn inward before pointing outward, and to question the lens through which we see others. Often, when we sense that someone close to us may secretly dislike or resent us, our instincts are drawn towards suspicion, confrontation, or defense. We begin gathering emotional evidence, interpreting behavior through a filter of fear or betrayal. But without self-reflection, our perceptions can be distorted, shaped more by our own inner conflicts than the truth of the other person's heart. The psyche is layered and complex. We do not see others directly. We see them through the veils of our expectations, past experiences, and unconscious projections. A glance that feels cold, a word that cuts too sharply, or a silence that feels loaded with meaning, these may be real cues, or they may be echoes of our own unresolved fears. To accuse another of hidden hatred or resentment without examining our own inner world first is to risk misjudging them and ourselves. Self-reflection becomes essential not as a form of self-blame but as a path to clarity. When we feel emotionally unsettled by someone's behavior, the first place to look is not always outward, but inward. What does this feeling remind us of? Have we experienced this kind of emotional tension before, and with whom? What part of us is triggered by the other's distance, silence, or coldness? These questions do not deny that the other person may hold negative feelings. Rather, they allow us to separate our historical wounds from the current moment. They help us untangle what belongs to us from what belongs to them. Through this process, we sharpen our psychological vision. Often, the discomfort we feel in relationships is mutual. The person whose behavior now seems suspicious may themselves be reacting to unspoken signals we are emitting. Our energy, tone, or expectations may be creating pressure or triggering their own wounds. Self-reflection allows us to see the relationship as a dynamic system, not a simple cause and effect. It reveals the dance of interaction, where both participants contribute to the emotional atmosphere. In doing so, it dismantles the illusion of blame and opens the door to understanding. One of the most subtle forms of projection occurs when we assign to others the feelings we do not want to face within ourselves. If we carry shame, we may interpret indifference as judgment. If we feel unworthy, we may interpret distance as rejection. If we struggle with envy, we may see hostility in the success of others. These unconscious processes shape our emotional perceptions in powerful ways. Without reflection, we risk accusing others of emotions that are, in truth, our own. This does not mean others are innocent of resentment or harm. It means we must first ensure we are not seeing through a distorted mirror. Self-reflection also uncovers the motives behind our desire to accuse. What do we hope to achieve by confronting someone we believe secretly resents us? Do we seek truth, or do we seek control, validation, or emotional vindication? Are we trying to protect ourselves from future pain, or are we punishing them for making us feel uncertain? These are not easy questions, but they are essential ones. They help us see whether our confrontation will bring healing or merely escalate tension. Sometimes we discover that what we truly seek is not confrontation at all, but reassurance, clarity, or emotional connection. The ego often resists this kind of introspection. It wants certainty. It prefers a clear enemy over the ambiguity of self-questioning. But the soul grows in ambiguity. It becomes more whole through the process of sitting with complexity, not rushing to judgment. Self-reflection strengthens our capacity for emotional discernment. It allows us to feel our instincts without being ruled by them. It gives us the space to consider alternative explanations. Perhaps the person is distant not out of hatred, but out of stress, insecurity, or their own internal conflict. Perhaps what we felt as rejection was really absence, or distraction, or a misunderstanding. In this way, reflection becomes a form of compassion, not blind forgiveness, but the willingness to see more than just our own side of the story. Every human life carries within it a blueprint of growth, a silent urge toward becoming whole, authentic, and internally aligned. This process, often slow and winding, is not about perfection or conformity, but about the discovery of one's true psychological self beneath layers of societal expectation, familial conditioning, and personal adaptation. This unfolding journey is called individuation, the process by which the individual differentiates themselves from collective identities and unconscious influences to realize the unique person they are meant to become. At its heart, individuation is not about separation from others, but integration of the self. It is the work of reconciling opposites within the psyche, such as the conscious and unconscious, the persona and the shadow, the masculine and feminine energies, so that one can live not as a fragment, but as a whole being. Individuation begins with self-awareness. It starts when the individual senses that something is missing, not externally, but internally. There is a quiet discomfort, an intuition that one's outer life does not match the inner truth. The roles one plays, the expectations one fulfills, the beliefs one holds, they begin to feel borrowed, inherited, or imposed. At this point, the psyche begins to stir. It whispers through dreams, emotions, conflicts, and patterns of suffering. It calls the person inward, asking them to look not at what they have been told to be, but at who they are beneath the surface. This is the moment when the path of individuation opens. The process is not linear, nor is it easy. To individuate is to confront the many selves that exist within the psyche, each with its own voice, needs, and history. One must face the persona, the social mask worn to gain acceptance, and ask whether it still serves or has become a prison. One must acknowledge the shadow, the rejected parts of the self that have been hidden in shame or fear, and learn to integrate rather than repress these elements. These confrontations are psychologically demanding because they challenge the ego's sense of control and identity. Yet they are also liberating because only by embracing the full range of the self can one step into authenticity. In everyday relationships, individuation plays a crucial role. Many interpersonal conflicts arise not because of the other person's flaws, but because of one's own projections, unconscious contents that are disowned and cast onto others. When someone close to you triggers intense emotional reactions, it may be less about who they are and more about what they represent within your psyche. Perhaps they mirror a part of you that you have not yet claimed. Perhaps they symbolize a fear or longing that has not yet been addressed. Individuation teaches that before attempting to change or blame the other, one must ask, what in me is reacting and why? What part of myself is being awakened in this encounter? This does not mean excusing harmful behavior or remaining passive in the face of real disrespect. On the contrary, individuation strengthens the self to the point where it can stand firm in its values and boundaries. But it does so from a place of inner clarity rather than emotional reactivity. It allows one to see clearly where the other ends and the self begins, where responsibility lies and where it does not. This clarity reduces the need for projection, manipulation, or codependence. One no longer seeks validation, control, or completion through others, but finds these qualities within. Dreams often play a significant role in the individuation process. They serve as messages from the unconscious, filled with symbols and imagery that point toward hidden truths. A dream of falling may indicate a fear of losing control. A dream of encountering a stranger may represent a forgotten or emerging part of the self. These images, when taken seriously, guide the individual toward greater self-understanding. They reveal where the psyche is out of balance and what aspects need to be integrated. They become a kind of internal compass, directing one toward wholeness even when the conscious mind is lost. The journey of individuation also involves embracing the paradoxes within the self. Human beings are full of contradictions, strength and vulnerability, love and fear, generosity and selfishness. The path is not to eliminate one side in favor of the other, but to find the third way, the higher synthesis that can hold both. To individuate is to realize that you can be both independent and connected, both rational and emotional, both grounded and imaginative. It is to move beyond either slash or thinking and into a state of inner complexity that reflects the true nature of the psyche. As individuation deepens, a sense of inner authority begins to emerge. One no longer needs to conform blindly to societal norms or familial scripts. Decisions are made not from fear or habit, but from alignment with one's inner truth. This can lead to major life changes, career shifts, new relationships, spiritual awakenings. But more often, the changes are subtle yet profound. A clearer sense of self, a quieter mind, a deeper presence in life. The individual no longer seeks approval as a substitute for self-worth. They become guided by an internal compass that is shaped not by ego, but by a deeper sense of purpose. Importantly, individuation is not a solitary act. While it requires solitude and self-examination, it is lived out in relationships. It is in the mirror of the other that one sees the self most clearly. Through conflict, love, disappointment, and forgiveness, the self is tested and shaped. But unlike enmeshment or dependency, individuation fosters conscious relationship. connections in which both individuals are whole, self-aware, and capable of authentic intimacy. In such relationships, one does not lose oneself in the other, nor does one wall off in self-protection. There is a mutual respect for individuality and shared humanity. The process of individuation does not end. It is not a goal to be reached, but a lifelong unfolding. At each stage of life, the psyche reveals new layers. The challenges change, but the essential task remains the same: to become more fully oneself, to live with integrity, to listen to the voice within even when it contradicts the voices around. In this sense, individuation is a sacred responsibility. It honors the uniqueness of the individual while connecting that individual to something greater, the universal journey of becoming conscious. To engage in this work is to say yes to life in its fullest expression. It is to move beyond imitation and into creation, beyond fear and into authenticity, beyond conformity and into truth. And though the path is often difficult, filled with uncertainty and inner confrontation, it offers the only kind of freedom that truly matters, the freedom to be oneself in a world that constantly asks otherwise. Through individuation, the self is not merely found, it is forged, revealed, and lived.